Still Halloween. No longer Halloween. How's that wrong? So by the time change, November, Halloween's over, 20 days and 4 hours to my cruise, so not counting.
I'm gonna miss you that week.
I know, right? I'll think of you. How about I'll eat a piece of cake for each one of you? That's easy. There's only like 6 of you. I can do that, no problem. I've never actually been on a Royal Caribbean cruise before, so I don't really know.
Good things about that too.
Yeah, I've been on a couple of carnivals, but I've never been on a Royal Caribbean. So I get to compare the food now. It's my thing I'm most excited about. Did everyone have a good Halloween? Eat too much candy? We had a lot of trick or treaters, and sometimes there's nobody, sometimes there's a ton of people, and we have a lot of them this year. So I didn't get to eat as much candy because I give a lot of it out, which is probably good because I don't need all of it. But it's crazy at this point. We're in November, right? So November 4th, I saw that even Coffee Bean this morning had their like holiday cups out. I'm like, no, I'm not ready, but that's okay. So it's the 4th. We have obviously class like normal this week. And then just to remind you, we probably don't need too much reminding, but Monday next week is a holiday. So we don't have school Monday. So just to kind of put that on your mind, if you are needing a break, we get a break next week on Monday, which is nice. And so what we'll do today is we'll jump back into our personality disorders that we got like a little close to halfway through, about a third of the way through. So we'll jump back into these. Don't forget that your final paper is due in a couple of weeks. So just again, something to kind of put on your radar. Make sure you're thinking about it, working on it. And as I mentioned before, if you at any point want me to look at a rough draft, I'm more than happy to do so. So you can always submit a rough draft to me before it's due. Thank you. And I'll read through it and give you some feedback. So just something that is open to you if you are interested. Okay. So any like questions, thoughts about any of that stuff before we get back to where we were? Okay. So last time, if we go back for just a second, right, we covered the odd personality disorders, paranoid, schizoid, schizotypal, lots of things in common with schizophrenia. Even the names are similar, as we talked about. And then we got into the first dramatic personality disorder. We talked about antisocial, commonly known as being a psychopath or a sociopath. And the other one that is the really big one in this category is the second one up here, which is called borderline personality disorder, or BPD. And as I mentioned last time, antisocial is like most dangerous to others. And borderline is really most dangerous to self. There's a lot of like suicidality and self-harming behaviors that come with borderline personality disorder. And so it can be pretty dangerous to the person who has it in terms of their own like health and safety. So I'll continue to write some stuff up here for, so borderline is next. I'm just gonna put BPD for short. But borderline personality disorder, I'm gonna put here. There's a lot of reactivity of mood. We'll write some stuff and then we'll talk about what it means. Reactivity of mood, a lot of feelings of emptiness. Right, emptiness and loneliness. There's a fear of abandonment. It tends to be really common with this disorder. And then I'm going to put instability and impulsivity. Just a few kind of key words to help keep them straight. This disorder, it's interesting. The name of it is a little bit misleading. So like borderline, like where does that come from? Just as a side note, on the border between being neurotic and psychotic is the thought where it came from with this disorder. So neurotic, meaning that you can't control your emotions. Psychotic meaning you're out of control or out of contact with reality. So the thought was that it was very like on the border between the two, hence the term borderline personality disorder. With this disorder, we see a lot of instability, right? Mood is kind of all over the place. Identity can be all over the place. Things that make relationships really, really challenging. So when somebody has this disorder, they tend to struggle in their relationships with other people because there's this incredible amount of like push and pull and instability that can come with it. You see a lot of efforts to avoid abandonment, being afraid that you're going to be left or abandoned by the people that matter to you. Oftentimes, this is thought to have some roots in being abandoned or neglected or abused as a child. It's very, very commonly confused with another disorder that we talked about. So we talked about CPTSD. And so what's interesting is for a lot of years, so this isn't even a fully recognized disorder yet, but what we're seeing is there's an incredible amount of overlap between CPTSD or like chronic post-traumatic stress disorder, complex post-traumatic stress, and borderline personality. You see a lot of the same stuff, like emotional flashbacks, emotional reactivity, feelings of emptiness, a lot of instability. And so what we're seeing is that a lot of people who've been diagnosed with BPD might actually have more of like a complex trauma. And so there's a lot of overlap between the two. I won't say you can't have both, but usually somebody would fit one pattern over the other. We see a lot of impulsivity. Being impulsive, meaning you're not great at controlling your actions. People get into reckless patterns of spending or drug use or promiscuity, like having multiple like sexual partners. A lot of like that impulsive kind of reckless behavior. And because mood tends to be all over the place, you also get a lot of like self-harming and suicidality that comes with this. People doing self-harming behavior sometimes to control all of the emotion. Very common if you hear of people being cutters or cutting themselves or harming themselves, very highly correlated with this disorder. Probably the most of all of them, because what happens is the mood is so intense that oftentimes people will cut themselves or physically hurt themselves as a way to manage the emotional intensity. So if you remember those tip skills that we talked about before, that temperature and intense exercise and stuff like that, those are really commonly used to treat this disorder. There's actually a very specific type of therapy that's used for this called DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy, trying to help people respond more effectively to life circumstances, to pause and check the facts and try and rein in the emotions, or even just wait for a couple of minutes. Because there's this common pattern that comes with this. And they even wrote a book that's so well named for this disorder. It's called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. And what you get with this disorder is a lot of like anger and hostility and resentment, but then a desperate, frantic, I didn't mean it, please don't leave me, right? And so people kind of go back and forth between idealizing someone, you're perfect, I couldn't love you more, please don't ever leave me, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. And then they make a little mistake, I hate you, how could I ever have been with you? Like, I don't want to be with you anymore. That person leaves, wait, no, I didn't mean it, please, you're perfect, I love you, come back. It's kind of like this whiplash that tends to happen, which makes relationships, as I said, kind of challenging, or it can require a little bit of patience on the part of like a partner or a friend. And so a couple of you nodding, any like reactions or stories or thoughts or anything with that? It's a really common like pattern with this disorder. Anything there so far? Okay, I have a little video that kind of highlights like 9 things about this that I want to just play for you because I think it's really helpful. Sometimes they call this emotionally unstable personality disorder. It's kind of like an informal name that sometimes people will use for it because the emotions are so out of control. So let me play this for you. I think it gives a nice like little addition to what I've about splitting. And that's that very black and white thinking that I was talking about, like you're only able to see things in their extremes. And that black and white thinking or splitting can really get people into trouble. And that's where that like fact checking comes into play, right? Like, is that accurate, right? Let's back up and check those facts. They also talked a little bit, so we have CPTSD and also bipolar disorder. both of these have a lot of elements in common with this. It can be kind of tricky to diagnose. We typically try not to diagnose people with it in their teenage years because the teenagers are really emotionally unstable anyway. So it can be very difficult to tell if it's like this or if it's just personality. But it does tend to be one of the more stigmatized disorders. Right? This and bipolar have a lot of stigma attached to them. Again, this one can be very challenging in terms of relationships because of that splitting, because of that instability. It can make it a little bit challenging. But there are some really great treatments for it, like the DBT that I mentioned. Really interesting book if you're interested in more about this disorder. But definitely most dangerous to self because of some of those self-harming, kind of suicidal type behaviors. Any thoughts, stories, comments, questions, anything about BPD? Anything about either of these before I keep going? Yeah. Well, then it's same as more like how it can be. Yeah, how it can manifest, yeah.
But, and it's like.
So if I understand you right, like, so I think what some people are better at keeping it more internal and not having the behaviors like come out as much. Because like everything, this exists on a spectrum. So some people have it in a more mild, controlled way, where they might experience a lot of that stuff on the inside, but they're really good at not expressing it outward. But it's still the same, all of it is still kind of considered the same thing. Just other people might be really bad at controlling it, and it's obviously going to have much more harsh consequences if you're like manifesting that behavior. But it would be the same, right? So you're experiencing it inwardly and outwardly, like anything else. Some people have better control than it. Anything else at the moment? Two more dramatic personality disorders: histrionic and narcissistic, right? And these two have a lot in common, right? They can be a little bit like overlapping. As we talked about within a category, there's a lot of overlap. But let's talk about histrionic. Histrionic personality disorder. So histrionic comes from hysteria, right? This is somebody who has like a lot of like emotionality, a lot of dramatic emotionality. So I'm gonna write dramatic. That's a really key part of this, right? We see a lot of like shallow emotions. A few other things. Let's put seductive behaviors. And often this person is very suggestive. So with histrionic, I have this up here where it's like they need to be the center of attention. It tends to be somebody who wants to be like on stage, in the spotlight, all eyes on you, all the attention in the world, right? And that's very kind of a key element to this. What you see though is an incredible amount of like emotionality, but it's very shallow. It's not necessarily like deep and authentic. It's just very dramatic and on the surface, oftentimes for the purposes of attention. You see a lot of like flirting and seductive behaviors coming out of this individual. Typically, it's like to prove that you could get someone, but you're not actually interested the second day off, right? It's like, I just need to prove that like I'm worthy of like having whoever I want. There's a lot of that like very dramatic emotionality, a lot of attention seeking that comes with it. Yeah.
But it's also like correlate to lucky liars.
It could be.
They want to like.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be. There's often a lot of lying that goes with this, right? And it almost can even hit the point where you believe your own lies because you like, it's so dramatic for you. So you do tend to see a lot of lying with both of these. This one a little bit different. It's like exaggerated, like sense of self-worth. But histrionic, oftentimes like you believe your own realities and truths, and you'll do anything to get that illusion, right? Yeah, you can definitely see that with this disorder. Let's see, what else do I want to say? There's a lot of like vanity that comes with this. Oftentimes people who have both of these feel like they're very attractive, beautiful, everyone wants them, kind of that vain element to it, very self-centered. can come with this as well. I always think my mother-in-law, I always pick on my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, I always feel like she has a little bit of this, right? It's just like everything with her has to be like this huge dramatic retelling. Like she'll take 20 minutes to tell a story of how she stopped at a stoplight. Like it's just, it's gotta be this huge thing where everyone is watching and paying attention. Everywhere we go, she flirts with everyone. And she's not interested, like she's married, like quite a bit older, married, but it doesn't matter. Like if we'll go to a restaurant, doesn't matter if our like waiter or waitress is like 18 or 20 or 40, like male, female, whatever, she will flirt with them, wants their attention, wants their interest. Yeah, it's like on a very mild level, but it's like this very sweeping, dramatic emotionality that tends to be very shallow. It's not genuine, it's very, very shallow in nature. And oftentimes like lying can be part of that as well. Very similar, narcissistic personality disorder. We spelled this wrong. There's too many letters in the middle. There we go. Too many S's and C's, right? Narcissistic personality disorder. I have someone with a big head, right? Very inflated sense of self-esteem, which we could say it's sometimes called grandiosity. I am all important and wonderful, and everyone wants to be with me or be like me. A little bit in common with histrionic in that way. But there's a lot of like being entitled, arrogant, can come with this as well, right? Like feeling like you're again all important, and requiring a lot of admiration. Wanting everyone to think you're the most beautiful, most powerful, most wonderful person that there is. Oftentimes this individual like can't put themselves in somebody else's shoes. They have a complete lack of empathy. They're not able to understand someone else's perspective. And why would I understand your lowly perspective? It's not nearly as important as mine, right? Like that's kind of the mentality that comes with it. Yeah.
What about for people that, for example, they ask for an explanation for something, you give them an explanation, and the fact is their opinion that overweighs the fact.
Yeah. I mean, it could be, yeah, it could definitely correlate with this of like, of course I know better. Like my opinion is the fact, is the reality, right? That kind of like mentality you would see with this for sure. Right. And there's definitely that's definitely kind of a piece of it.
What about people that they create their own scenarios, to things that haven't happened yet?
Yeah.
And want to believe it and impose it on other people like, oh no, you're doing this is happening, and even though it's not happening, does that also fall under?
It could, you know, again, kind of this, I think if we frame it in the sense that like everything revolves around you and like your thoughts are real for everyone else, then it can fit here. And it kind of seems like a little bit of like what you're saying, like kind of creating your own reality and then believing in it. A little bit of overlap with both of them. Like these two are kind of similar in that way, which is why they're in the same category. Yeah.
I was gonna say, isn't there a certain figure this way?
Isn't there what?
A certain figure that's pretty much the definition of the narcissistic.
I mean, there's lots of great examples of it.
I'm not using his name, but it's like it's election season.
We won't get into that, but yeah, I mean, you could in a way, right? There's some like elements of that. And I think it's hard to be somebody in a position of power. Like you have to have a little bit, I think, of like narcissism, like grandiosity to like be in a position of power. But yeah, I mean, I think you could go that way as well. Sure. I have an example that is a really good one. Fictional character, but a really good example of this. Let me play it for you. Great example of somebody who's like no ability to put yourself in somebody else's like spot. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So the tricky thing with all of these is it's who you are, right? It's across everything, it's who you are. So people can learn to temper it a little bit, to like reduce it. And I wouldn't say you can't get rid of a personality disorder, but it's hard when it is who you are. Like you can learn to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. You can learn empathy. You can learn to like temper it, but get rid of it. So it's kind of a controversial idea. Like can you change your personality? Right? A little bit, but not 100%. Right? So you can definitely learn to reduce it dramatically. I don't know if you can ever completely get rid of it, is the thought. But people do like social skills training, right, where they learn to put themselves in other people's shoes, empathy training, where they learn to feel empathy. And you can get to a point where you can do those things more fluidly. Yeah.
So people usually ask for help when they notice sort of paralyzed.
Yeah.
Narcissistic personality, well, I don't know, they don't feel this is affecting their life.
Right.
They live. So when are
They might not ever, right? And they're gonna think they know better than the therapists, right? They might, the histrionic one will try and seduce the therapist, right? And get them on their side. The narcissistic one will be like, well, I know way better than you. Like, why would I go listen to you? I don't need help. You're not gonna need help, right? That's kind of the mentality that comes with it. So that's the hard part about this one specifically. They're not gonna think they need help, right? Because they are in that position of like power and grandiosity and entitlement and arrogance. Oftentimes, if it's going to hit that point, it's because it costs them something that matters. And so maybe it costs them a relationship and they want to fix it. But they would have to be kind of on the mild end to be in that space. So, like anything else, like there's gonna be some people who have this on a mild level and they're able to kind of see it and identify it. But if you have it in kind of a severe way, like you're not gonna think you need help. Yeah.
But what's the people that weaponize that they're aware,
Yeah.
they're aware 100% of their actions, they're aware of everything that they do, that they say. And instead of changing, they weaponize it,
Yeah, use it for their advantage in a way. I mean, and that person's not gonna think they need help, right? Like they're using it to their advantage in a way. And there are people who have it in such a severe way that like they're never gonna seek help. Because it's not them who needs the help according to their perspective, right? And so, yeah, I mean, weaponizing, it's an interesting way of putting it, but I completely see what you mean by that. Of like, they're using it almost like a weapon.
to make everybody else around them.
Right.
feel that something's wrong with them.
Yeah, because this person feels big by making other people feel small.
Because also, those people also have a manipulative personality.
Yeah. There's often a lot of like manipulation that goes with both of these, right? One's a little more exaggerated and the other might be a little covert, but like it's there. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll talk about causes altogether. But yeah, it can be either. It can be a little bit genetic, it can be environmental, it can be a combination of the two. Personality disorders, because your personality is so complicated, of course, there's thought to be like multiple layers to it. So we'll talk about like all of them together. But yeah, it can be a little bit genetic. It can run in families, or it could be modeled by a parent, and then you learn it because that's how they were, right? And then in which case, how do you tell it apart, right? Which is always so tricky. So my example, Gaston, he's like the best example of this, right? So good, right? And some presence, and it's like my dreams are your dreams. You see the vanity that comes with it, right? He's got like the wedding party all ready to go and doesn't know anything about her. He hasn't even asked, right? Just that like sense of entitlement and arrogance, really, really common with this disorder. Right? Kind of full of themselves and has a big head. Versus the other one, think about like needing to be on stage or like the center of attention is a little bit more like prevalent. Any other thoughts or questions, comments with either of these two? Yeah.
His song is like entitlement right there.
Yeah, right. The whole like I think his like main song that he sings. Oh, for sure. The whole thing, right? His character just oozes narcissism. Yeah.
So you can see more guys with narcissism than girls.
Yeah.
Because
I would say a little bit more. Like this is more common in men, histrionic more common in women. But it can happen either way. Right. The emotionality piece, I think, makes histrionic a little more like feminine, like or common in females. But narcissism and that like domineering, entitled arrogance is a little more common. But it happens in both, like in either sex. But yeah, it can be a little more male dominant. Next ones, we got a couple more. Anxious personality disorders. So these ones are dominated by anxiety, right? So we see a lot of anxiety with these anxious, kind of fearful behaviors. So avoidance is the first one. Let me erase that so it's not quite so low. We have OCPD up here. I wanted to just keep erasing for like 20 minutes, but every now and then I think of it like I could do something funny like that. And probably at some point be like, what are you doing? Okay. Avoidant is the first one up here. Avoidant personality disorder. I'm gonna put up here, they feel inferior. A lot of feelings of inferiority. I'm not good enough. Right, there's a lot of fear of embarrassment. Right, like constantly afraid to take risks and embarrass themselves in any way, and then uncomfortable in social situations. So we'll say social discomfort. So with this disorder, we see a lot of like uncomfortable feelings in any kind of social relationships, feelings of inadequacy, I'm not good enough, very sensitive to kind of any kind of negative evaluation of any kind, oftentimes just like a very timid, anxious, like hypersensitive kind of individual. The tricky thing with this is this individual tends to want close relationships. Right? If you think of like schizoid and schizotypal, they tend to be loners. This person wants close relationships. They're just terrified of the rejection or embarrassment that might come with them. And so they tend to be intensely lonely, right? Oftentimes this individual is very lonely because they're too afraid to take the risk of somebody rejecting them or embarrassing them in some way. It's almost like a social phobia in some way with the relationships because they're so afraid of that rejection or humiliation or being ridiculed in any kind of way. So there's a lot of loneliness and just hypersensitive to the smallest little things, like little comments will throw them off or like sit with them really poorly. And it's just that constant fear of being inferior or being embarrassed and being uncomfortable around other people. So you avoid them despite the fact that you actually really do want close relationships. Dependent personality disorder. With this one, you see a lot of like clinging and submissive behavior. Clinging, submissive. Right, some other things I can put up here, fear of separation. And the other thing I'll write is hopeless when alone. This person oftentimes has a very intense need to be taken care of. And so they cling to another person for dear life. It can be a friend, a partner, a parent, a sibling. It can be anyone. But they typically pick one or a couple of people and they are 100% dependent on them. They cling to them. They're submissive to them. They will never argue with them and do anything against their will. What classes are you taking? I'll take the same ones. What's your major? Oh, great, that sounds good. I'll do that too because I can't decide for myself. Calling somebody, I don't know what to wear today. I need somebody to make that decision for me. Very difficult time making even small decisions because they tend to very much rely on and be dependent on other people. Very uncomfortable being alone. Incredibly like dependent. They have a hard time being by themselves. Oftentimes relying on other people for everything, and they can't make even the smallest decisions on their own. There tends to be a lot of fear of being abandoned or rejected that goes with it. Often feeling just deeply, deeply hopeless when by themselves. So you might get some like stalking behavior that comes out of it, clinging behavior, like very obsessive kind of things. They won't disagree with other people, because that might lead to like rejection in some way or being, yeah.
What is the extent of not being able to choose like behavioral decisions? Is it like
Yeah.
for big things or is it for like
Everything, right? And so like, because sometimes like there's nothing wrong with like, oh, I can't decide, let me ask for some help, right? Like I hope we all do that with stuff. Like if you don't know the answer, asking other people is a great thing. Or like your friends, what classes are you taking? Oh, I'll join you, right? Like I can make that work. But it's like every little thing, you know, like I can't decide, should I wear this sweatshirt or not? Like, and so I need to call somebody else to make that decision for me because I just can't, right? It tends to be with like every little thing. And instead of having your own wants and desires, you pick up somebody else's. because you don't want to make waves in it. So it tends to be pretty excessive. The real thing is you're really just like clinging on to someone for your life. You're afraid to upset them or be separated for any reason. Yeah.
I kind of knew somebody who was basically this.
Yeah.
Because like, at my former workplace, like, you wouldn't see this person without their partner, like 24/7.
Therapist, but he has this disorder and it kind of manifests in the sense that he stalks his therapist, finds him, ends up joining his family, as I said, marries his sister. It's just like a really great example of like therapeutic situation and boundaries gone horribly wrong. But you see that like clinging and submissiveness. I can't handle when you're gone, so I need to know where you are. Like, again, I think he goes and steals his mail to find out where he is, right? It's just that desperate fear of separation and hopelessness when you're by yourself, and very much like clinging to somebody. In this case, his therapist, it can be a friend, a family member, a sibling, a parent, it can be literally anyone. And oftentimes people will jump from person to person. If they tap someone out or they break up with them or like the friendship ends, they move to the next person, so it's person to person. Any thoughts or questions here? Again, that was what about Bob? I definitely recommend it if you want to be I had a client once who did this with me. He called me, I want to say it was like 76 times in one day, like 76. And then I was working at Starbucks at the same time as I was like training to be a therapist. It was such a great job for my master's degree because I was like caffeinated for free throughout the whole thing. And he found out that I worked there. He came to my store and like started like stalking me at the store. Like it became this huge ordeal that we had to like work through. It can happen. It can happen as a therapist. It can happen with a friend, a partner, whatever. But it can be often difficult to make those boundaries because this person can't handle it from their own. 76 times. I thought I was obsessive. That's a lot, right? I think my record's like 6, right? The 76, that's a lot. One more. If I'm allowed to have a favorite, this is my favorite. So it's weird to say I have a favorite personality disorder, but this is it by a mile. Some things I'll put up here. So we see a lot of like obsession with things being perfect. So perfection, order, and control are big parts of this. There's a lot in common with OCD, as you can imagine, obsessive compulsive disorder, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. But they're a little bit different, and I'll explain how. You see a lot of like inflexible, rigid behavior. Everything has to be just so with this disorder. Everything has to be like perfect, just so. And the interesting thing with this is so with like obsessive compulsive disorder, you have a distressing thought that leads to like a behavior to get rid of the anxiety, right? Like I'm afraid that I'm going to get sick or contaminated, so I wash my hands a certain number of times. Or I'm afraid that like there'll be a fire, so I have to check the coffee pot 49 times to make sure it's off, right? With this one, everything has to be just so and perfect, right? And can I tell you a story? I'll tell you, yeah, I got 2 nods. Yes, we're good. Okay. Personality disorder story. Okay. I seem to be attracted to this for some reason. Every single person I've ever dated or been with for 21 years has this disorder, right? So my first partner that I ever had, I was in community college, right where you are in this class. And I was dating this person. We had been together like 3 months and we were going to Disneyland together. Okay? I love Disneyland and I'm super flexible at Disneyland as long as I get churros, right? Like my day is like, okay, let's ride some rides. I want lots of churros. And that's all I care about really at Disneyland. Not so much anymore. Now I'm a little more like, with kids, like I'm a little more on it, but that was all I cared about at the time. So we're driving to Disneyland together, the 2 of us. And then again, we'd only been dating like 3 months. So our relationship was really new. And we were like, what do you like to do? What do you like to do? You know, like what are your favorite kind of chatting about the day? And we get off and we get on the Mickey and Friends train and we're getting close to the park. And she starts like laying out the plan. I'm like, that's great. I like to have a plan. Plans are good. Expensive more so now than it used to be then, right? It's ridiculously expensive. But she's like, okay, so we're gonna go in the park, we're gonna go straight to like Splash Mountain, and then we'll go over here, and we'll get a fast pass for this, and then we'll go here, and then we'll do this, and then this, and then this, and then this, whole day laid out. I have no problem with that, right? Okay, great. Where are the churro stops, right? Like, as long as you build them in, it's all good. And nothing wrong with having a plan. But here's where it went wrong, okay? We go in the park, and her first thing she wanted to do was Splash Mountain. We go to Splash Mountain, and it's closed. It ruined the entire day. There was no ability to like adapt, no flexibility to adapt. So like me being like a psychology student at the time in community college, I was all like, oh, this is interesting. Like 3 months in, like, red flag, right? She freaked out, right? Like, okay, well, now what? The day's over. It's ruined. Like it's 8:02. Like we're good. We got so much time left. Like it's okay. Let's skip Splash Mountain and go to item 2 on the list and pick up and keep going, right? No, was not possible. It literally for hours like shut her down. She couldn't move on from it. And we're like, we go to item 2, we went to Haunted Mansion, right? And we're on Haunted Mansion, and the whole time we're on the ride, she's like, okay, well, maybe if we do this and then this and then, I'm like, all right, we're on the ride, be quiet, right? Like, and like the whole time, like just focusing on this, right? Could not adapt and change. And that's really key with this disorder, that you're not able to be flexible, right? Everything has to be just so. And if it's not, it causes you so much anxiety and distress that you can't move on. Now, we broke up like 3 years later. I tolerated the Disneyland thing. I was very patient about it. I didn't mind at all. There were lots of churros. It was still a fun day. And eventually she reset. But anyway, like fast forward a few years later, and I met my partner, and we've been together for 21 years. And my partner, the first time I go over to our house, she's like, if you could just not sit on the couch. Like, what's wrong with the couch, right? She's like, well, I have a thing with the couch pillows. Okay. Right, so if I sit on the couch, she'd have to fix them afterward. And she's like, when I'm gone at work, just don't do the dishes. Don't put the laundry away. Like I like it in a certain way. I like it in a certain place. I was like, here we go again. Like, why am I so drawn to this for some reason, right? And then like I go to her parents' house in her dad's closet. She's like, here, let me show you why I am this way. Her dad's closet, every hanger exactly a ½ an inch apart. Everything ordered by color. And her dad, don't sit on my couch. I was like, weird couch thing in the family. So whenever I'm mad at my father-in-law, I sit on his couch and screw up his pillows. Like it's like a weird passive aggressive thing I have for him. But like, it was so interesting. She was like, don't put my laundry away because I like it specifically like this. Don't do this because I want it like this. She'd be at work. I'd sit on the floor because I didn't want to sit on the couch and mess it up. Like I didn't mind. I loved the hell out of this person. I was like, fine, whatever. Like I won't sit on the couch. I have my neuroses too, like whatever, right? But so interesting. After 21 years of being with somebody with OCPD, I have OCPD, right? To a smaller degree. But now, fast forward 21 years later, my partner, she's like, put away the laundry. I don't care where it goes. If it's clean and it's in the closet, I don't care. My closet, everything in a certain color order, everything arranged perfectly. Why did you put it there? That's not where it goes. I have weird things with my cups. Like it has rubbed off on me after 21 years. I have neuroses that are OCPD related. Our children are OCPD little, like they're on their way. You don't diagnosis till later. But this is totally my kids. Like I went to put away a book yesterday. Went to put away a Dogman book. My daughter was like, that's not where it goes. It goes here. I was like, we can fix it tomorrow. She's like, no, I can't sleep until we move it. Okay, right? Like, and who am I to correct her right at that point, right? Like, 2 parents with like very OCD, everything has to be perfect. My kids are that way. They've learned it from us that everything has to be just so. My 12-year-old, her shelves are perfect. And if you move anything on them, she knows. Someone with this disorder, like if I move that paper, like you might not be able to move on with your life until it's just so. If you open the closet or like a pantry of someone with this disorder, every can is probably faced forward, labels forward, everything organized. There's a lot of like meticulousness that comes with it. And you lose that flexibility and openness in exchange for efficiency. So what you see is like everything has to be perfect rather than with OCD, it's more like distressing thought followed by a behavior to fix it. Right, so really interesting. I, for some reason, tend to be very drawn to this. I find it comforting. I don't know. I'm not sure. Everything has to be perfect, and I'm kind of that way now too. We went to Disneyland. What was it? A couple like weeks ago, like a month ago, we went to Disneyland, we're walking in the park and I'm like, okay, so we're gonna go here, and we're gonna go here, we're gonna go here, we're gonna go here, and I'm like, no, stop it, like I'm yelling at myself in my head. And because I have kids, I can adapt, but like, I have a little bit of this now, it's interesting, yeah,
That was me in New Orleans 2 years ago. I was
yeah,
have to be like constricted.
sure. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with having a plan. It's good to have a plan. You want to make the most out of things, right? But when you can't adapt to things going awry, that's where you run into issues, right? Like it literally ruined the whole day for that person like way back. Weird to think about someone from like 21 years ago, but like it ruined the whole like day for her. It was crazy. Any other like thoughts or comments? Anything else here for the moment? Yeah. Often, right? And I hear it all the time. People be like, that's so OCD. And I'm like, no, that's so OCD, right? And that's a little bit of the same anyway, like coming out. But if somebody has to have something just be perfect and just so, that's this. And they're very commonly confused, like in the like general population, but not as much diagnostic. Like they're very different. This is like a global thing versus the other tends to be very specific triggers. So not misdiagnosed, but very misunderstood. There was a thing, did you ever get that?
No, she asked.
No, okay. Any other thoughts? Yeah. So the only element in common would be the rigidity, right? Like, so when people are on the spectrum, the autistic spectrum, they tend to need things to be very consistently like the same. That piece might have a little overlap, but everything else is very different, right? So that one little piece of it, yes, like do the rigidity of like lack of flexibility can be very similar presented. Yeah.
Do people like grow out of these ones or?
You can, right? So my partner, as I said, after having 3 children have a way of like messing up any like efficiency and perfection that you have in your life. Like they're like really good at that, right? With whether they need to be or not. And so my partner over 21 years has mellowed so much, right? Like doesn't care about any of those things anymore. But there's still little pieces of it there that I can see. And as I said, for me, I've gone, like we've met in the middle, like over 21 years, we've kind of like met in the middle with it. So people with all of these can kind of temper them, but I don't know if they ever truly go away necessarily. Right? And my partner loves to do this to me, so I'm going to push myself here, Eddie. So like I have a tendency, and this is probably where mine comes out the most, is like I like everything to be perfect, right? And so like if I'm writing notes and they're wrong, I have to rewrite them because it annoys me. And whatever, it doesn't interfere with my life. Like it's just another way of getting it right. So like I have my paper, right? My notes. This is painful to do. But like if I did this on it, it just makes me angry easier, right? That ruined it. I have to reprint it now, right? Like I'll try not to because it's a waste of paper. But it's like little things like that. Like I ruined it, but I can push myself. And people, the way that you like deal with these is you push yourself a little bit at a time, right? And so like, I'm going to make myself sit with that and like, it won't make me happy, but I'll sit with it. And you learn to just kind of let it go. And that's how you can make these a little bit better is you just kind of push and push and push at it a little bit at a time. And just don't even want to look at it though. Okay. Causes of personality disorders, which is this entire page. Okay, anyway, moving on. As I mentioned earlier, it's thought that it's kind of like a combination of stuff, right? Like everything compounds to build to these different disorders. And so it's a like multi-dimensional risk perspective. Everything builds on what came before. There is a little bit of a genetic piece. So if I start with biological, there are genetic elements to a lot of these personality disorders. They tend to run in families because they're very based on like neurotransmitters and like imbalances like you would see with the anxiety or the depression or the loneliness. Some of that has like a biological component to it. And so if somebody is born biologically vulnerable, then what happens is it might shape their early childhood experiences and parental interactions. Let's say you have a child that has a lot of anxiety, that's going to shape the way the parents interact with that child, which only reinforces it. So it's like everything builds on what came before. That's kind of the main idea. So some of it has to do with like early childhood stuff. So for example, borderline personality disorder is often thought to be rooted in childhood abandonment or neglect, which is why that individual is so afraid of being abandoned, right? Because they were as a child. If you grow up with somebody who has like everything has to be perfect, and that's your model of what's normal, right? That's how you're going to be, most likely. Or maybe you rebel and you're the complete opposite, right? So it can go either way. We see a lot of like cognitive elements, the distortions that you have, the black and white thinking, the splitting, the little things that you learn to think about the world around you. Behavioral stuff, what has been modeled? What have you been conditioned or rewarded for, right? If you're rewarded for thinking that you're important and grand and entitled, you're going to keep doing it, right? If you flirt with people and they like pay attention to you and want you, that's rewarding. You're going to keep doing it, right? So there's a lot of like reward and modeling and conditioning that comes with it. We also see some like cultural stuff with like norms around these things, right? Like what do we view as positive or negative? It's really thought to be like this combination of everything. It's almost like it creates the perfect storm in a sense, where now you're like vulnerable to this pattern. And as I said, you can kind of grow out of it a bit, but the idea of like getting rid of it is kind of controversial. They are very commonly misdiagnosed because it could just be personality. If it's not interfering with your life in any way, it's not a disorder, right? Or interfering with the lives of the people in your life. We could add that piece to it as well. In terms of treatment, therapy is challenging for these disorders. Think about these different individuals that we've talked about, right? So here, I'm going to back up for a minute and show you why therapy could be hard. Okay, let's go through this. The paranoid personality person is not going to trust their therapist. They're out to get them, right? They have ulterior motives. They're not going to trust them. They're working with the government, everything, nothing is safe. The schizoid personality disorder is not going to have enough like interest in going to therapy. They don't express a lot of emotion. They're just going to sit there. Schizotypal might think their therapist is possessed or has like odd magical powers and they're out to get them. Like every single one, antisocial, they're going to seduce or manipulate their therapist, harm their therapist. This one's going to have problems with like attachment to their therapist, right? Hating them and then loving them and kind of going back and forth, right? Trying to seduce or flirt with the therapist to get them to like cheat, right? This one's going to think they know better than the therapist. So why would they ever go to someone else for help? It's just like every single one, right, has barriers to treatment, right? I could go on, right? Like this one's going to be so sensitive to every little thing the therapist says, dependent on the therapist, right? This one might be okay, right? As much, right? Because there isn't so much like relationship wise. But what you see is that every single individual with these disorders is going to struggle with therapy, like most likely. And so it's a lot of like teaching skills, right? Like if you aren't good at flexibility, let's teach you flexibility. If you have no empathy, let's teach empathy. If you have no, like whatever, like we teach you the skills that you're deficient in. We might consider medication. Some of these like medication can be a little bit helpful for reducing anxiety or reducing depression, but it's a lot of like social skills training. What are you like struggling with? And how can I teach you better ways to fill that gap? And that's a common thing that you see. Now, I have a little like, I think it's kind of fun. I have this little like personality party. Imagine a party where everybody at the party has a personality disorder, right? And your job will be to figure out which disorder they have. This should only take you a few minutes to do. I'm going to have you, I want you to work on it in groups. So you only need to turn in one per group. But let's try and do in the next like maybe like 8 minutes or so. And then we can talk about it real quick before I collect it. But with each one of these, there's only, I think 8 people, so not all of them are used. But on the back, you're gonna write which personality disorder you think each person has. And they're only each used once, there's 2 that aren't used. So I would say work on this with another person or 2, just to kind of give yourself a chance to make it easier. So start reading through them and decide who has which personality disorder. Here you go. And you can turn in one sheet per group or your own, it's up to you. You don't need to write why, just figure out who has which, I laugh because I know it. Right? And make sure you put your first and last name on whichever one you're gonna turn into me, so I can give you credit for it.
The Green, and then the Blade Brothers.
I like it, right? I think it's helpful to the description on the back.
That's all the.
Yes. I wasn't sure.
Yes.
Peter.
Try to next year.
Okay, that's okay. But I just feel
Breaks. Yeah.
Right, very soon. Oh, it's in Victoria. 500. Yeah.
He was raising. That's not right. Sherry is not that. And then that.
Have Sherry as one of my search about the answer.
So,
Most of you look pretty close, so you can wrap up in the next like minute or two, so we can go over the answers real quick before we are done.
Right. I don't know.
But you look nice.
All right, so in the interest of time, let's go over it really quickly together and I'll collect it. More than being right, I just want you to kind of see how it's not always easy to like identify these. So on the exam, what you'll do is you'll have like a little scenario and then you'll be like picking from 4 options of multiple choice kind of thing. But how about Donna? Anyone quickly, what do you think Donna has? You had a guess? Yep. Histrionic, right? Like she wants to be the center of attention, dramatic, sweeping, but very shallow. How about William? Schizotypal, perfect, like the odd magical forces, right? And you've had, again, if my examples help you, right, think of the dragon. How about Sherry? Borderline, BPD, right? Like that kind of emotional, like instability all over the place. How about Winston? Narcissistic, Gaston, right? Again, with the examples. How about Peter? I could date Peter in theory. Right, but in theory, Peter and I could work out, right? On some level. How about Doreen? Paranoid, right? Doesn't trust anyone or anything. Schizoid? Oh, I'm sorry. Harold? Schizoid. How about Harold? Schizoid personality disorder. And then John? Antisocial, right? So you didn't use all of them. I do have some extra copies of this if any of you want one. I think it's kind of a helpful little overview. So I'll leave them up here if you do want one. Otherwise, make sure you turn in your sheet with your names on it for credit. And then I'll see you on Wednesday. We'll start our next chapter, chapter 14. Oh, extra? Or is that, oh, no, that's perfect. Yeah, I think they're helpful.
Thank you.